Be right back.
Welcome to Human Factors Cast, your weekly podcast for human factors, psychology, and design.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to a special bonus conference coverage episode of Human Factors Cast. We're recording this live on September 3rd, 2021. Actually, it's not live, it's pre-recorded. But I'm your host, Nick Roome. I'm joined today by Christy Harper, owner of End-to-End User Research, and we are here to talk about UXPA International. Hi, Christy. Welcome to the show.
Oh, hello. Thank you for having me. Great to
thank you for coming on. So we are covering UXPA International today. So I figured we'd just kind of get into what UXPA is. I know a lot of people kind of see that thrown around, but can you tell us a little bit about UXPA and what it is?
Sure. So it's User Experience Professionals Association. It's set up similar to HFES, if you're familiar with that, in that it has local chapters and a national presence. And then it has a national conference and also has some smaller local conferences. So this was the national conference. UXPA used to be, at one point in time, Usability Professionals Association, but that's going back quite a ways. So if you've heard of that, that is now UXPA. And last year, of course, they had to cancel their conference. And so this is their first time back in a little while to have something in person.
Yeah, we can talk about that in just a minute. But so UXPA, it's a conference that supports research, design, and kind of evaluating that user experience of products and services. It sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like there's a lot more, or it's more sort of industry focused than HFES, where you might have more an academic focus. In HFES, you might have more of an industry focus and sort of best practices, design trends, those types of things at UXPA. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So I think HFES does tend more towards the scientific and the academic, where UXPA, there are researchers, there are human factors people there, and there are also designers and people who are very much in industry and doing very applied work. So the talks seem to be more about, you know, how to work in industry as opposed to scientific, you know, findings, research type things.
Yeah, and I think UXPA are the folks behind World Usability Day, right? Is that? Do you know about that? That's them.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So you actually went to UXPA this year, and I was wondering what actually brought you to the conference this year. You know, a lot of people are kind of on the fence about whether or not they should go to conferences in person right now, especially during COVID. But you had a reason to be there, right?
Yes, I did a talk this year. So, you know, last year I was planning to go. Obviously, COVID changed everything and they didn't have the conference and nobody went. But they contacted me and said, do you still want to do your talk from last year? And so I did a talk about how to show the return on investment of UX research. And you wouldn't think you would have to show return on investment, but a lot of times you do, because, you know, part of this job is selling your research, right? So that was my primary reason. And it was also that I hadn't been out in a very long time. And what they promised to do was to make sure that they kept really big rooms. There was a lot of space for people to be far apart and socially distanced, and masks were required unless you were speaking. So
yeah,
it felt pretty good, you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, you kind of talked about a little bit about the venue this year. What was it like in the past? Like traditionally, what does UXPA look like, right? How many people? What kind of setup? Is it similar to HFES? I think that's a good frame of reference for a lot of folks that listen to the show. What was it like in the past?
So in the past, I would say it's more like 500 or 600 people. It has a similar format in that one day they have workshops, and then the rest of the days they have talks throughout the day. And sometimes they have multiple tracks. They'll have two or usually three tracks. Although it wasn't quite like that this time, but they usually have about three tracks. They have an opening reception. They also have a closing reception, though, which I think is kind of nice. Um, and it's it's usually pretty big, right? And it's in the same kind of hotels that you would expect to find HFES in sort of cities with touristy kind of areas and places to go when you're not at the conference.
Yeah. So how did things change for COVID? I know you mentioned like larger rooms, maybe a little bit less people. What were some of the bigger changes that you noticed?
Well, first of all, there weren't as many people, obviously. The talks, there were less talks. So they were, instead of having three tracks, you might only have, for some, we had three, but for some, there were two only. And then, there were just a lot of things that happened that some people, because of the storm, also, some people who were driving in from other places had to, turn around and go back. So on top of, the COVID restrictions and dealing with that, other people had the storm to deal with and weren't able to get in. So that was kind of strange. But, in another way, having a smaller group, you got to see people over and over again. UXPA provides breakfast and lunch as part of their conference package. So you would see people at breakfast, and then you might see the same person at lunch and then at the reception. And because it was smaller, you ran into people more often. Because, in a big, huge conference, you see people once and you may not see them again for a few days, right? You may not really get to talk to them. But because of the nature of this being small and contained, I think I met people and got to know them on a little bit of a deeper level this year.
That's kind of cool. It sounds like it felt a little bit more intimate where, um, I think it'd probably be more obvious by the first lunch or second breakfast that, oh yeah, I'm going to see a lot of these people, and it's almost like a subtle encouragement to get up and introduce yourself or have a conversation with somebody that you're going to be sharing the next couple of days with. One point I
Yeah.
do want to make is that you mentioned the storm. We are recording this on the 3rd, so the conference concluded yesterday, and I guess the aftermath of Ida coming through is kind of what you were mentioning there. Just for anyone who's listening later in the future or wondering what we're talking about. So that's interesting. I actually kind of like that intimate approach and wonder how maybe conferences. This is just me speculating how conferences can maybe harness that in the future. Of even with conferences with larger attendance, perhaps bringing in some of that intimacy and encouraging that networking aspect. I do want to get into the conference itself. It sounds like there's a couple different tracks. There was talks, there were posters. I want to get into kind of what some of your favorite talks, moments, and posters were. So we can start with talks. Did you have any favorite talks from the event?
Well, I really did enjoy the keynote. The keynote was Justin Dower, and he was talking about working towards having connection and fulfillment in your career. And he talked about being in a company where he was just doing research and testing, and he didn't really care about the product. He wasn't motivated to go to work, and thinking about, do you want to do that for 20 years, or do you want to find a place where you feel more fulfilled in the work that you're doing, which I think is always something to think about, right? Nobody wants to spend their entire career just sort of going through the motions. So I kind of appreciated that. I felt like it was a good start to the conference.
Kind of an uplifting,
Yeah.
what are you doing with your life? Get out there, find the thing you're passionate about. I like that message too. And I think, we try to echo that on the show. It's like, find something that you're passionate about, or, find your niche. And so what about posters? There's a poster session. Was there one poster session, multiple poster sessions?
There was one poster session, but it was really small. I want to say 6 or 7 posters. And so the way they did
Okay.
it, they would have coffee breaks, and so they extended one coffee break to be longer, and that's when the poster presenters were there. But the posters were up through the entire conference. So whenever you had a break, you were able to go over and look at them. Most of them had QR codes that led to further information about the poster if you wanted to read about it. So I thought that was really helpful in case you didn't get a chance to actually speak to the author of the poster. But they had a lot of
That's
other interesting talks too.
Oh, you want to talk more about talks? Or
I
are
was
you
just
talking
going to
about like with
say
the
I thought it
posters?
was interesting. Yeah, I was going to say I thought it was interesting that um, there were so many government talks, and that may have been the location, right? That like there were 4 or 5
Yeah.
talks about working in the government. There were a lot of talks about accessibility. Um, and there was one about chatbots, autonomous vehicles, but the rest of the talks were very, very like how to get the most out of your UX career. What does a senior UX person do? How do you make that transition when you're in the mid career and decide whether to go to management or stay in research? And then there were skills things like journey mapping and making the best surveys. And so I think it's very applied, but I think there was enough of a range that a lot of people would get something out of it.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like, at least from some of those themes that you mentioned for talks, it sounds like it'd be a lot more applicable to kind of those early to mid career professionals who are looking for to keep up with design trends or keep up with research methods that are coming out or anything like that, as well as kind of answering some of those career questions or sort of highly what's the word I'm looking for, most frequently asked questions about career path, those types of things. um yeah, it sounds like there was quite a a range of topics there, and it sounds like a great conference. And I'm like I said, I may have mentioned it on this episode. I don't know if I mentioned it before when we were talking, but I haven't actually been to UXPA before. It's been something that's on my list, something that for one reason or another overlap with HFES or similar temporal proximity can't attend. And so I'm glad that we have sort of this coverage. And are able to talk with you. Are there any other favorite posters that you saw while you were there?
No, no, I actually didn't spend a lot of time at the posters. I was mainly going to talks, and then because I had my own talk, I was like fine tuning
Right.
that in between.
Yeah. Okay. And then just what were some of your favorite moments in general from the conference?
Well, I thought it was really nice, the whole networking piece of it. And that may have been because we've been away from that for so long. Everything I've been attending has been virtual, and even the way I work has changed. We don't go into the office as often unless we need to, right? If you're not running research, you don't really need to be up there. So, everybody's being more careful. Um, but I felt like at there was just so much sort of deeper networking. So everything became more fun. Like the breakfast and lunch were more fun. The coffee breaks, you weren't standing by yourself checking your email. You were talking to people that you'd already met. So, you know, there were some like really aha moments in some of the talks. But I think what stuck with me the most when I left was sort of this like, wow, I really made connections. And I met somebody from Houston, and we're going to get together again in Houston. And I met somebody else from San Antonio who's coming to Houston for another work thing, and we're going to get together. So I feel like there was just a lot more of that kind of activity that was really exciting for me.
Yeah, that sounds like a great. Like I said, I think if there's a way for conferences to harness um, that intimacy of a small conference at a large event, I think that's kind of the key, right? Uh, I want to talk about key takeaways from the conference. You said there were a couple aha moments from the talks, but was there anything that you learned that you're going to bring home for your own research or anything like that?
Well, we don't do as much work with software, but there were a lot of interesting talks about how to work with an agile development cycle, which is something that's interesting to me because I love that idea of sort of fitting something into somebody else's process and working quickly. And, I really like that. They talked a little bit, there was a talk about the right method, which is that rapid iterative testing. And that's another thing I really like to do. And there were talks about how to get into UX research, how to get your job and things like that. But there were also talks about what do you do as a senior person? How do you thrive when you feel like, you've done this for a long time, especially if you don't want to be a manager? And they talked a lot about mentoring and finding ways to be fulfilled later in your career, which was kind of, I thought, a nice thing to talk about. That you don't usually get. A lot of things are really aimed at junior level, right? So it was nice to see just a few talks looking at people who are in mid and senior level careers.
Yeah, that is a great point. Like you said, most sort of these frequently asked questions are typically geared towards the folks just out of school or mid-career. And you're right, there is kind of a lack of resources for the people who are heading a lot of these departments and might not know kind of what to do next, and they're just kind of winging it. And it sounds like it was a good kind of support system for those types of roles. Anything else you want to mention about UXPA International?
I think it's worth checking out because I know a lot of the people I know go to HFES, and this is very different. So if you're in industry, if you're a practitioner, if you're interested in applied work, I think this is a nice balance to HFES. I love HFES, and but I like going to both because I think it's a different crowd. There's you just meet new people, and it's a different approach to a conference. So I would say to check it out.
Awesome. Well, that's going to be it for today, everyone. Let us know what you guys think of the UXPA recap. If you like, you can hang out with us on our Slack or Discord, get to us on any of our social channels, visit our official website, sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date with all the latest human factors news and conference coverage. If you like what you hear, there's a couple things you can do to support the show. 1, you can leave us a 5-star review. That always helps us out. 2, tell your friends about us. Or 3, consider supporting us on Patreon. And as always, links to all of our socials and website will be in the description of this episode. I want to thank Christy Harper for being on the show today. Where can our listeners go and find you if they want to talk more about UXPA or just get in touch with you?
Okay, well, I'm on Twitter at ChristyY41. You can also look me up, Christy Harper, on LinkedIn, or go to our business website, which is end-to-end-user-research.com.
And as for me, I've been your host, Nick Roome. You can find me across social media at Nick_Roome. So, Christy, at the end of the show, we like to say it depends because in all things human factors and user experience, it always depends. So I'm going to count us down. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning into Human Factors Cast. Until next time, 3, 2, 1. It depends.
Human Factors Cast brings you the best in human factors news, interviews, conference coverage, and overall fun conversations into each and every episode we produce. But we can't do it without you. The Human Factors Cast network is 100% listener supported. All the funds that go into running the show come from our listeners. Our patrons are our priority, and we want to ensure we're giving back to you for supporting us. Pledges start at just $1 per month and include rewards like access to our weekly Q&As with the hosts, personalized professional reviews, and Human Factors Minute, a Patreon-only weekly podcast where the hosts break down unique, obscure, and interesting human factors topics in just 1 minute. Patreon rewards are always evolving, so stop by patreon.com/humanfactorscast to see what support level may be right for you. Thank you, and remember, it depends.